Hi guys, welcome back. Got a bit of an update, a really interesting one on the confiscation of a knife that I was importing. I'll chuck a link up at the top for the first video where I actually had a visit from the police. They came around to slap my wrist and tell me off for being a naughty boy, and I told them I hadn't been a naughty boy. I'd bought a perfectly legal knife and tried to bring it into the country. In fact, I hadn't even bought it. I'd won it in my first ever win on an Instagram competition, and it was a real nice knife from Concept Knives, so I was pretty gutted that it had been seized. So I talk a lot about why they seized it and stuff in the first video. Like I said, link up above. And then after the police kind of left me alone, because I gave them a bit of a hard time about it, and I was pretty peed off the way they were treating me, to be honest. They're kind of criminalising me, and I hadn't broken the law. And I then got a letter from Border Force. So I just want to take you through the process, and if you guys have had something similar happen to you in the UK and Border Force or Customs have confiscated one of your knives, this could really help you. It contradicts maybe some of the stuff that's out there already, because I know there's videos from people like Black Belt Barrister that is kind of, you know, saying flipper knives, oh, they're a bad idea. But that isn't what I found when I challenged this stuff. So let's get into that. So the first letter I received was from Border Force. Now you guys, if you have a confiscation, it'll either be from Customs or Border Force, and if you go on the .gov website, depending on which of those agents confiscated it, there'll be different addresses or email addresses that you can actually appeal to. So first get on the .gov website and just type in, I think it's Article 12A, but you could just type in Border Force confiscation, something like that, and it will give you the information. So I get this letter, notice of seizure. Dear sir, madam, the following items, 1 times flick knife received from China, are liable to forfeiture on the grounds that they were imported into the United Kingdom contrary to the prohibition in force, see number 1 below, and they were not described accurately by the sender on a written declaration accompanying the parcel, see number 2 below. They have been accordingly seized, see number 3 below. Condemnation proceedings. If you claim that the items are not liable to forfeiture, you must within 1 month of the date shown above give notice in writing of your claim to the above office of the Border Force, stating your full name and address. If you make such a claim within that time, legal proceedings in a magistrate's court will be taken for condemnation of the items. These are civil rather than criminal proceedings at which you or your legal representative should be present to show cause as to why the goods should not be forfeited. It will then be a matter for the court to decide whether or not the goods are liable to forfeiture. The court that is wholly independent of Border Force will also decide the question of costs. If no such claim is made, the items will be deemed to have been duly condemned as forfeited. See number 4 below. Restoration. You can ask us to consider returning the goods even if you accept the goods were seized properly, or you are challenging the seizure, or you have already challenged the seizure and a condemnation hearing has confirmed the items were properly seized, or the time limit for challenging the seizure has expired and the ownership of the items has automatically passed to Border Force. This process is called restoration. Border Force will consider all such requests on their individual merits, and all relevant facts will be taken into account. It is Border Force's policy normally not to restore seized excise goods such as alcohol, tobacco products and goods prohibited from importation, for example drugs, offensive weapons and endangered species. Notice 12A provides important advice and information of what to do if you have had something seized. The notes are available at www.gov.uk and search Notice 12A. And then it numbers these parts of the law they're talking about. So number 1, by virtue of Section 1, Restriction of Offensive Weapons Act 1959 and Section 49 of the Customs and Excise Management Act. So that's the letter. It kind of gives you 2 options as to how to get your stuff back. Restoration, which basically is kind of you just asking them for it back, and it's very unlikely to work. They even stipulate that in bold type on there. I don't understand on what basis that would even be worthwhile. And condemnation proceedings, where you actually ask for the matter to be dealt with in court. Caveat that you could end up with quite severe court costs, because whoever kind of loses that court case, you know, if you got your item back, then the court costs would be liable via the border force or customs or whoever took the knife. If you didn't get it back and the judge decided that they were right to confiscate that thing, all the costs would basically be down to you. So that could run into hundreds or thousands of pounds. That could be pretty unpleasant. So I was kind of pretty nervous. I think this letter makes it look as if it might as well not be, you know, challenged. You might as well just write that thing off and think, well, it's a couple of £100. I'm just going to lose it. And, you know, I don't want to risk the court costs and whatever. And it's a load of hassle to reply. But me being me, and the fact I could probably make a video out of it, I thought, you know what, on principle, I'm absolutely sick of this kind of government overreach, and that they're, you know, producing this nanny state approach to just seizing everything off people, and then basically kind of the onus is on us to try and get these things back. And, you know, they're basically illegally seizing people's goods when they shouldn't be. So that annoys me. It annoys me as much as people doing, you know, stealing goods in any other manner. Just because it's done through a government agency doesn't make me feel any better about it. And I'm a legitimate collector, like a lot of you guys out there. I'm not breaking the law. I don't go around doing stupid things with knives. So the fact that I'm having things pretty much stolen from me that are perfectly legal was bugging the hell out of me. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to risk it. I'm going to risk the court case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send in a condemnation letter. So I'm going to ask for this to be judged in court, and I'll read out what I sent in. So if you go to that notice 12A section on the .gov site, it actually gives you a template to use, which is a pretty reasonable template, and I kind of took some detail off that and then used that in an email that I put together. So I start off, you know, I reference the agency's address, etc. I reference the reference number and all that sort of boring stuff. I'm not going to read that out. I'm obviously putting these up on there with the parts redacted, that, you know, I don't want to put my home address and stuff online or any reference numbers and stuff. So I start by saying, I'm claiming for 1x manual opening knife sent to me by Concept Knives. This has been seized incorrectly as a flick knife, in quotes. I won the item in an online competition. I have attached details above. I am a collector and reviewer of knives and outdoor gear. I work in the UK defence sector. So what I wanted to establish first is I'm, you know, a legitimate persona, that I hadn't even purchased the knife, you know, it had been won, and I wanted, you have to show proof of ownership. And bear in mind, when you do this condemnation, you're basically admitting ownership, and you're expected to prove that you're the owner of that object. So, you know, I wouldn't be doing this if I'd kind of ordered an actual flick knife that had a spring, etc. in it. If you've gone and done that, don't do a condemnation, because you're basically then saying, yeah, hey guys, I definitely own this. So I'm the guy that tried to import the illegal goods. So firstly, don't import illegal goods, but secondly, definitely don't, you know, try and take that to court and win it back, because that's not going to end well. So I then say a flick knife is designated as a blade that opens automatically, and I then quote the part of the law that designates what a flick knife is, and that was recently updated, which has caused all this problem with flipper knives, etc. So I write in there, I've actually copy and pasted it from the .gov site where these laws are freely available to look at. Any knife which has a blade which opens automatically, that's an important word, 1, from the closed position to the fully opened position, or 2, from a partially open position to the fully open position, by manual pressure applied to a button, spring or other device in or attached to the knife, which is sometimes known as a flick knife or flick gun. Now this new part of the law where they talk about, other device in or attached to the knife is basically where they're kind of overstepping and referencing flipper knives or any knife that has any sort of facility for you to flick the blade out. And there was a lady in the Home Office that went on to say that she felt thumb studs were okay, but it was to do with speed of deployment, which leaves the whole subject as murky as anything. And if that law were to be true and it just meant that any knife that you could basically use something on the blade to kind of flick that blade out, a Swiss Army knife with a kind of broken spring would be highly illegal. Most UK pen knives would be illegal. The UK PK from Spyderco would be highly illegal because you're using a hole in it, which is a thing on the blade to flick it out. And so that would be a very difficult point to argue. But for me, I felt the relevant word in here was automatically. So I did a dictionary search for automatically, because we all sort of think we know what automatically means, but if you search for that in the dictionary, it generally means something that happens without any human interaction whatsoever. So I then go on to talk about that. The definition of automatic from the Cambridge Dictionary: automatic, adjective, independent. An automatic machine or device is able to operate independently of human control. I then say, the article you have seized is a manual knife. It requires human intervention to push the blade out. Light pressure would not cause the blade to deploy, while a hard flick of the wrist would. There are no springs in the item which could automatically deploy the blade. I therefore ask that the knife be returned to me. I would suggest saving us both time and money and avoiding a pointless court case if possible. This item has clearly been seized in error. Kind regards. So my argument was going to hinge entirely on the fact that the blade does not in fact open automatically. It is completely reliant on human control. So here we have a flipper, that's a CRKT M16, and as you can see, if I press the attached device on the knife, it hasn't automatically opened the blade right up. I can press that and open it a little way, I can press it a bit harder and open it further, or I could flick it out and open it completely. But I am doing that. It is not independent of a human. That law has been written specifically for something that either has a spring, as in an automatic knife, a flick knife, and they've updated it to encompass assisted opening knives, which I'm very sad about, because I felt that there was nothing really wrong with them. I don't think there's a whole spate of criminals running around buying assisted opening knives. But there can be no doubt that that's why that's been added. So the idea with that is that if you had an assisted opening knife, that as soon as you moved that blade out to about there, the spring would then take over and then it would automatically open up. Now you could still make a legal argument that actually you still need to assist the blade in coming out somewhat, and the fact that you're assisting it means it isn't automatic because it still has human intervention. That would kind of be a pretty interesting point to argue, but it wouldn't be one I would be confident to argue myself. I don't have enough money for a solicitor, and I was taking a big risk on this one. It could have cost me maybe a few £1,000s if things had gone badly wrong. But I thought, take a stand. I'm fed up with being pushed around by government departments. We all have a right in this country to operate in a lawful manner and carry on about our lawful business or our hobby, where we're not upsetting anyone, we're not hurting anyone, and we should be able to do that unhindered, not being harassed by government departments that are overstepping. So I sent that email in. There's some stuff you have to send with it. I think I had to send some ID and various bits. It stipulates all that if you look it up on the .gov website, so it tells you exactly what you need to do. And I made sure all that was done. You know, don't be half-assed about this stuff and send in a sort of annoyed letter and think that that's going to get you anywhere. Make sure you do every single step, because at the very least what that demonstrates to these guys is that you're a serious individual, you're done your due diligence and research, you've taken the time to actually send in all the things that are required, and then they're going to think, we probably don't want to go to court with this person because that's going to cost us time and money and we may not win. Whereas if you just write, I'm really annoyed you nicked my knife, they'll think, well, good, you know, this guy's going to be an easy touch. So I get a letter back from Border Force a couple of weeks later. In fact, it just arrived today, which I'm very pleased with, referencing this matter. Dear sir, I understand it has been decided to release the goods to you. The package containing your goods was passed to Royal Mail with instructions to deliver it to you. The tracking reference is, etc., etc. If you have any further queries, please contact Royal Mail, quoting the above tracking reference. Yours sincerely, Border Force Officer, Post Seizure Unit. No signature. So they clearly didn't want to go to court. You know, they knew that they were kind of barking up the wrong tree with that. So that casts a lot of shade to me on the fact that some people are arguing that flipper knives are illegal and no one should have flipper knives. I actually think that if you look at the law in terms of what the term automatic means, and you apply that using common sense and with any sort of reasonable person, that they're going to reach the same conclusion. And I think that they definitely don't want those cases going to court, because if you get a ruling that says, hey, all these knives are definitely not a problem, then they would have to stop seizing them all. And this is a kind of undercover way for them to just take knives that are arriving in the country, and a lot of people aren't going to even bother to argue. So they're just taking knives, seizing them, using them as propaganda. So these are the things that are turning up in all these pictures that you see on the news. Oh, haven't we done well? We've seized 800 knives or whatever. And most of them are probably, you know, completely irrelevant to the actual criminality in question. They're just knives like this one that's been randomly picked up, taken away for no good reason. So while I was editing this video, the package actually arrived. So you can see it's got the Border Force stuff on, and then on the other side it's got some information regarding, you know, the contents, etc. And it's clear that it's just been sent straight on. The stuff they were talking about where they've said, you know, that it was labelled incorrectly was one of their problems, and this has been labelled as a stainless tool. So, you know, it doesn't say knife on it, which I'm guessing is sort of an issue for them. So knife companies out there, it's probably worth just being honest on these things and saying, yeah, it is a knife rather than a stainless tool or anything like that, because that can create problems with this stuff actually getting through to the customer at the end, and they can use that as an excuse, as a reason why they might have stopped it. Interestingly, I only queried the fact that they were complaining about the style of knife, i.e. they were saying flick knife, I was saying no, it's manual, and the other stuff I didn't even moan about, you know, the incorrectly labelled item, and that seems to have just been completely disregarded now I've brought up the subject of the knife itself. So just to show you exactly what was confiscated, so Concept knives, great knives from Concept as always, awesome. I'll do a review on this piece when we finally get round to it, but it all came completely boxed up. It was clear that it had all been opened, and then here we go, beautiful knife, and you can see the flipper tab there. So that's the knife there. It is the shard model, and it's locking mech, you can see on the bottom there. It's a frame lock, and it is very easily opened and closed with that flipper tab. But as I state, you know, it's human intervention that causes that blade to open. If I just press it out a little bit, you know, it doesn't cause the blade to fully open. That is not automatic. There is no springs in it. It's simply me flicking it out or not flicking it out that causes the blade to open. And equally, you know, it's got a sort of inlet cut in here. I could actually use that and flick that out by sort of spidey flicking it, and that's inertia as well. So you could just as easily argue that anything that with a hole cut in the blade could also be flicked open. But that's the knife, guys, you know, just to heads you up on exactly what was taken and what's been returned. So guys, if you've had the same problems as me, there's a kind of cookie cutter approach of how you might go about dealing with it. It's cost me a little bit of time, not much effort, and luckily no legal costs. Beware, you know, I can't guarantee that you're going to have the same result as me. This could backfire and you could end up in court and having to argue your point in court. I would suggest if it's the point about an automatic knife, then you've got a pretty good argument. Where things might get tricky, and I think something that they kind of missed out on a little bit, I would have personally gone down the gravity route, because that may have been a little bit harder for me to argue, because some of these knives that have a very, very loose pivot, you could, it won't happen with this one because it doesn't have a loose pivot, but you could, you know, deploy it by gravity. That's still using inertia, but some of them you could just sort of pop the blade out and it will literally drop open, and there would be an argument to be had there about gravity. You could get around that by kind of tightening the pivot up a bit and making sure that the blade isn't just dropping open. Something like a CJRB Pyrite is a good example. You know, they've got really, really loose blades on and they just flop straight open. If you press the button, it literally just opens. So that would maybe be a harder one to deal with. But if you're dealing with a flipper mechanism or any of those kind of mechanisms that are attached to the tang, or it's a thumb stud or whatever it is, if you're having the same issue as me, then maybe try this approach and see how you get on. Just beware that once you go down the road of condemnation and you send all this stuff off, that is now happening. You can wiggle out of it later on if you kind of bottle out and you decide you don't want to risk maybe going to court, but you may have already accrued some expenses by then. You know, that the border force or whatever may have already started running a tab on how much this court case is going to be, and they might have started billing you for their solicitors and stuff like that. So just be aware that it is something that could end up costing you cash, and if it's a, you know, a £30 knife or something, it's probably not even worth your time and effort doing. But good to know that at the moment at least, you know, we should be able to import these things and not have too much hassle. And even if you do get hassle, it looks like we will be able to get them back fairly easily. Thanks a lot, guys. I hope that's been of help. It's been a big strain on me because I was pretty worried about this, but you know, it's one of those subjects that I really wasn't prepared to bend on. And even if it had ended up costing me money, I just can't leave it alone. You know, I don't like bullies, and I especially don't like governmental department bullies that are just picking on perfectly normal people for no apparent reason, maybe for a bit of propaganda for themselves or to kind of politicize a matter, and it's people like us guys that pay the price for that, and that's just not acceptable. So fight the power, take care guys, see you soon, and I'll catch you next week.